Our top story, in yet another setback for big tech across the world, the lead European Union privacy regulator has imposed a hefty fine of 91 million euros, that translates to about $101.5 million, on the social media giant Meta. This decision comes after the company inadvertently stored some users' passwords without the necessary protection or encryption, raising serious concerns about user privacy and data security. The inquiry into Meta began 5 years ago when the company reported to Ireland's Data Protection Commission that some passwords were stored in plain text, which means they were not encrypted. It is widely understood that user passwords should not be stored as such, as this basic principle emphasizes the importance of safeguarding user information. Such a lapse risks abuse arising from accessing such data. In response to the $102 million penalty, Meta took immediate steps to fix the error upon identification. The company maintains there is no proof of password abuse or improper access, emphasizing that it proactively flagged the issue to the Irish DPC. Now, throughout the inquiry, Meta engaged constructively with the DPC, demonstrating its commitment to compliance. That's the statement coming in from the tech giant. Now, interestingly, why this is of importance to us is because this is the third big fine imposed on a big tech company by the European Union itself. As you see on your screens, earlier this year, the European Commission had fined Apple 1.8 billion euros for antitrust violations. This month itself, Europe's top court had ruled that Google must pay a 2.4 billion euro fine as well for abusing market dominance of its shopping platform. And now, of course, Meta has been fined with a listing of 91 million euros. The big question, therefore, remains, will India implement stricter regulations to ensure data privacy, or will it be business as usual for big tech giants in India? I'm being joined by my very esteemed panel of guests: Pawan Duggal, cybersecurity expert; Febin John James, head of AI innovations at TARS; and Ritesh Bhatia, data privacy and cybersecurity expert. Thank you all for joining me on this discussion. Let me start with you, Ritesh Bhatia. Now, this instance of Facebook's data privacy breach stems from 2019. It stems from a development in which Facebook itself alerted the authorities to the fact that it was inadvertently saving passwords as plain text. A lot has changed in the game of data privacy and encryption, at least globally, in the last 5 years. Yet, do you feel that there are some important lessons to be learned from this episode, both for Facebook as well as for countries such as India, where data privacy still remains a very nebulous concept?
Yeah, hi. Firstly, thank you so much for having me on the show. And it's very nostalgic also because I'm coming on Mirror now after so many years. I used to be there so frequently earlier. So yeah, definitely. Lot many lessons. For everybody, imagine a giant like Facebook is like, it was storing like the data in the plain text and the passwords, in fact, in the passwords and the plain text. And this is like a big thing, even not just for us, but for everyone, every company also, that could they have done such a silly mistake. I mean, this is a mistake to the to a level which is unimaginable. I mean, it was pretty shocking, and that's the reason they definitely deserve that kind of a fine. Now, my only concern is, what if this data has been already like misused, sold? We know, when it comes to data, how notorious these organizations are. I mean, I have no this thing comes in telling the same about even Meta group of companies, because as you rightly said, this is not the first time that they've been penalized. They've been penalized time and again. And what about the Indian government? Is Indian government also going to, whether we have the Data Protection Act right now, which is which is functional or not, that is secondary. But something like this, I think like a big question needs to be asked there. The government needs to ask Meta is that, listen, you had this data, so much of passwords in the plain text. Has it been misused? What if this data has been like transferred, gone somewhere else? Doesn't that put the people at a big risk? I understand that, okay, Meta has told that earlier also, that you need to like change your password, enable two-factor authentication, which I think we should come at a later part of the show, that why two-factor authentication should be made mandatory, not just for like, Instagram or Facebook, but in fact for everything, and that will be like a big thing. But many of us, we reuse those passwords. We've already seen the kind of crimes that are happening. You know, you start getting those mails that this is your password, and we have access to blah blah blah. You must have seen that. Of course, it generally lands up into spam. But the kind
Yes,
of calls
absolutely.
I also get on a daily basis, that too from the CXO level, they tell me, Ritesh, we got this. Is there something to worry about? So yes, now the thing will be with this data being stored in the plain text, although back in 2019, if the access was there with some other people, or if this particular thing has gone somewhere else, I think it's really a wake-up call, and especially for the government and even for the corporates, that they need to go and do this hygiene check time and again, you know. And what happened about the auditors? You know, had they ignored this, did they really think, oh, this is like by default they would have encrypted it? But I think now even the auditors need to go back and start checking the basics also.
And also, I know it's something, it's common knowledge, but I just wanted to just reinforce for some of our viewers who perhaps aren't understanding the extent of the seriousness of the situation. If by chance your Meta passwords, or say your Facebook passwords, because most of the country still equates Facebook to Meta, keep in mind your Instagram passwords, your WhatsApp data, they're all linked to the same company. So imagine, I mean, if you, Facebook, Instagram, or WhatsApp are three social media platforms which almost form 90% of an average user's usage on social media. So they're all interconnected and they're all at risk if your password gets leaked. Let me also bring in Pawan Duggal at this point. Mr. Duggal, for the benefit of our viewers, can you just explain what plain text is in this point? I mean, as the name sounds, it's essentially without any encryption, without any sort of camouflaging. But how big a lapse is this on part of Meta, even though it has admitted to it, even though this was 5 years ago? The fact that passwords were being stored as plain text, this is something which is quite unforgivable for any repository of privacy or data information, especially a company as big as Meta.
Clearly, when we talk of plain text, we're actually talking about saving data in crystal clear plain text, which means that it's open to be read, to be transmitted to anyone. There is no layer of protection of any kind whatsoever that's been put on the said passwords which have been saved in plain text. Now that's completely alien to the concept of data protection. The very fact that you are dealing with passwords, you're dealing with sensitive personal data, because passwords have got a direct connection with the identity of the concerned individual who's created or with whose username this is associated with. Now, the very fact that this happened in 2019 is of no consequence. The fact that it has happened by a company of this magnitude with this kind of revenues and this kind of numbers speaks volumes of the neglect that's been given to the entire issue of protection of cybersecurity of passwords. Look, the important issue is not that they didn't got misused and therefore things are fine. Sorry. The law is concerned, you are required to encrypt passwords. You are required to put in reasonable security practices and procedures when you are storing passwords. Now, if you don't do that, that itself is an issue of non-compliance. Independent of the fact whether any loss was caused to it or not, you did not comply with law. And mind you, by the time in 2019, the General Data Protection Regulation of the European Union had already kicked in. So clearly it had put on world-class standards on what needs to be doing to protecting personal data of individuals. So once the company has not done it, it's of no consequence that it complied later on, it assisted with the investigation. Once a breach has been done, then the concerned authorities are duty-bound to find out what kinds of fines need to be given under the GDPR. And therefore, that's a big learning that we cannot no longer take the argument that, okay, I did a mistake, but no harm emanated from the mistake, so I should not be penalized. Sorry. Globally, the data protection legislations are going in the direction that it's of no consequence whether there any loss has been caused or not. You did not comply, you will have to face the music. I think the similar message is also now getting replicated in India under the Digital Personal Data Protection Act 2023, which has not yet been implemented. But in this case, if you don't comply with the law, independent of whether any loss was caused to it or not, you can actually be fined up to 250 crore rupees per contravention. So I think all stakeholders need to tighten their belts and focus on compliance, lest they should be levied with such huge fines that their business operations might become untenable.
That's a very important point in terms of how these big tech corporations are now being increasingly read the Riot Act, whether it be in the UK, whether it be in the United States, in the European Union. Febin John James, you've been with us as we have discussed this for the past 3 or few weeks at this point, and we have always greatly valued your perspectives as well. The larger point that has been that the underlying message that we have seen in terms of these crackdowns, whether it be on Google, whether it be on Apple, whether it be on Meta, is the point that there is this increasing realization that for far too long, big tech corporations had an open playing field because the rest of the world was yet to come to terms in terms of the massive potential of data and massive potential of social media. Now it seems that countries are catching up and are getting to terms with the fact that these big tech, in the guise of monopoly, in the guise of market dominance, have actually been abusing very basic regulations and very basic consumer rights. Febin, that question was to you.
I didn't understand. Like, what was the question there? I understand that. Can you rephrase the last question?
No, my question is that essentially, if you look this, I understand. I'll just repeat my question, Febin. Essentially, we have been discussing the fact that whether it be Google, whether it be Apple, whether it be Meta, increasingly there seems to be a crackdown, or at least cutting them down to size. When we have seen in terms of in terms of court orders or antitrust trials in the United States, in the European Union, in the UK as well. Increasingly, globally, countries are getting to terms with the fact that these big tech companies for several years have had an open playing field and have abused their market monopoly and the market dominance, and now have to be read the Riot Act and now have to be brought to task when it comes to the consumer rights they have violated.
Yeah, exactly. So, unlike the previous two things which Europe had taken a strong stand on, this is a very trivial issue in the sense that plain text has been resolved more than a decade ago, and still Meta is using a very incompetent practice to kind of store it in plain text. So, having said that, the previous two violation was about not about incompetence, but this is about incompetence as such. So yes, the countries are catching up. People are aware. I mean, I'm happy that people are aware of what is the difference between a plain text and an interpreter, which happens when these regulations continue to happen. Even in India as well, they should go beyond that. Again, the plain text thing is a very trivial part of the entire security process as such. But I think I would say that it's a start of it, and there is much more compliance and regulation yet to come in this area.
All right, so then what is the way forward then? Let me just bring it to that, Febin, because you are someone who also understands the role and the potential and the threat of AI today, given the fact that all of these platforms, whether it be Apple with Apple Intelligence, Google, as well as Meta AI as well, they're all looking at AI at this point. Now, to a layman, my point of view is one of the key threats, or at least threats which I fear from AI, is what if AI gets access to my data, which it will have if it's stored with the platform, and then misuses it. And given the fact that we have seen countless instances of these big tech companies being irresponsible with data, this latest being the Facebook example or the Meta example, what are the challenges that we face, and what are the key things which a country like India needs to be at least ensure when it comes to companies operating within its boundaries?
Got it. So a couple of things here. One of the important thing here is that since this data is controlled by these companies, even if right now your data, they already have it, which I can reasonably doubt they might have it as such, they will be using it, and there isn't something which is holding them accountable, or in the sense that we are at their mercy to know that if they are using it or not. Because it's controlled by them, and it's most of these companies who build these models tend to close source their training data set. Even Meta has open sourced the Llama, AI database, AI model as such, but all the data which they have is closed. So unless and until the government regulation kind of mandated that whatever training data you're using it on AI, right, there are security mechanisms, encryption, cryptography mechanisms which can ensure that private data is not present. At the same time, not government peeking into the data set as such. So there are such technology available which can be implemented, which is not implemented yet. Unless and until these things come into play, the problem is that even regulators or government won't know that there's a lapse. Even in the case of Meta has to go tell the government that, hey, there was a lapse, right? So what if, when there is no regulation or there is no technical help which government is getting into saying this, how can you kind of monitor it? Yes.
Okay, I'll quickly go across to Pawan Duggal as well before I get to the last word from Ritesh Bhatia. Mr. Duggal, you mentioned an important term called GDPR. I'm sure a lot of our Indian audiences won't get it, but this is the most important holy book in terms of data privacy in Europe here. Is it high time now that we look at data prevention and data regulation a lot more seriously as the rest of the world, especially the European Union, looks at it?
There is no denying the fact that the winds of change are blowing, and the quicker we start focusing on data protection, the better it is. The gold standard internationally for data protection is the European regulation, which is the General Data Protection Regulation, or the GDPR of the European Union, which has actually stipulated fines up to 4% of your total annual gross turnover should you be found to be violating this law. Now, taking a leaf out of that, we have come up with, in India, with the Digital Personal Data Protection Act. The law got passed last year on 11th of August 2023, but it's been more than 1 year, almost 12, 13 months, but no rules and regulations have yet been made under the law, and consequently, the law has not been made operational. It's high time that you make the law operational, because this law is going to be a game changer, because if you are going to be fined up to 250 crore rupees per contravention, and the fine does not go to any complainant, but goes to the government in the form of payment to the Consolidated Fund of India, it changes the landscape and the matrix of the ecosystem dramatically. Now, everybody will have to go ahead and ensure mandatory compliance with this law if they want to be in business.
So step one, Mr. Duggal, is, as you've pointed out, that this law of data protection has to be made mandatory, has to be operationalized in the first step. But Ritesh Bhatia, the last word, very quickly. In a country where we are quick to outrage over Meta leaking our data, but at the same time, we happily get to submit photocopies of our Aadhaar or PAN card or for our password details without a second thought of whether that data has been misused or not. Is it time for a paradigm shift, not just from the governmental point of view, but also from the user point of view, as to the importance of data privacy and the importance of safeguarding your data?
Yeah, it's absolutely, it's extremely important because Ritangshu, let's understand this one thing. Whatever data, like, whether we are talking about our Aadhaar or this, see, these are, we are just not giving it away like that. We are just going to a photocopy center, we just take it, and well, that's another thing, that the photocopy center may be taking 5 copies and giving us 1 copy because we demanded 1 copy, and the balance 4 copies, he's selling it at a premium, which I know for sure that has been happening all across the country. But, let's look at the Gen Z. Let's look at the generations that are who are going to be giving away their particular identity. So it's extremely important that they understand that's what really happening to them. They've been seeing that their parents are getting calls from so many, like from developers, from finance companies, from loan companies, and whatnot. They don't want to go through that hassle. So they are actually understanding that too much of giving this data is absolutely, it's incorrect. Like Pawan sir would always say on your channel and on other channels that it is a great Indian, the data vomiting revolution, and I completely agree with him. So this generation has taken his words very seriously and now are very, very careful that no, we don't want to do this, and that's the reason it's extremely important.
And we hope, Ritesh, that through this broadcast, all generations, not just ours, all generations, not just ours, understand the importance
Yeah.
of data privacy. We've just recently had 2 instances where someone's Aadhaar data was being misused for crores of fraudulent transactions here. Ritesh Bhatia, good to have you back on Mirror now. Hope this is the start of many more interactions to go forward. Pawan Duggal, always a pleasure to have you. Also a pleasure to have you, Febin John. It's
Thank you so much.
time for a short break. On the other side, more news and updates continue on Mirror now. Stay tuned.